Hello, everyone. We're Group 1. My name is Hannah Reyes.
My name is Maya Espinal.
My name is Natalie Nguyen.
My name is Alexi Bolo.
And my name is Julio Juarez.
And today our presentation is on the types of healthcare fraud and their effects. So to start off, I just want to explain quickly what healthcare fraud is. So the FBI defines healthcare fraud as anyone who intentionally deceives the healthcare system in order to receive unlawful benefits or payments. And it affects everyone from healthcare organizations to providers and insurance companies to beneficiaries. So there are many types of fraud, but for our presentation, we'd like to focus on 5 specific types. So I'm going to cover the first type of fraud, upcoding and unbundling. Phillips and Cohen describe upcoding as the false submission of codes by providers to insurers like Medicare, Medicaid, and other private companies. Providers submit incorrect codes for procedures and diagnoses more serious than they actually are. Diagnosed or performed in an attempt to receive more reimbursement from the insurance companies. Second, the Gibbs Law Group defines unbundling as when a healthcare service provider submits separate billing codes for 2 or more procedures, when in reality, the procedures were performed together. Because insurance providers like Medicare and Medicaid often have lower reimbursement rates for procedures performed together, billing insurances for separate procedures will result in a higher reimbursement rate. And as I mentioned, upcoding is one of the most common forms of healthcare fraud, especially for Medicare users. For example, Medicare typically reimburses its users $50 for an annual checkup. But if a provider instead records that it was a more complex surgery or like checkup that was more complex, it would then get reimbursed for $100 or more for a service that they never actually provided. And upcoding happens more often than we think. Phillips and Cohen report that from the fiscal year 2014 to 2019, the number of hospital stays at the highest severity level increased by 20%. Basically, what this means is that hospitals would bill Medicare for long inpatient stays, when in reality, most of the inpatient stays only lasted a short while for less severe cases. Improper reimbursements like these then cost Medicare and the government billions of dollars each year. Overall, because of upcoding, the price of Medicare and other private insurances will continue to increase for its beneficiaries with higher premiums and other out-of-pocket costs like copays or insurances. Next, I'll discuss the effects of unbundling. So Whistleblowers International report that unbundling creates a cost redundancy in aims of seeking unlawful reimbursement for the same procedure over and over again. An example of unbundling can be seen in the process of taking blood work. So usually when a sample is taken and tested, it's done so in preset blood panels, which have like a set price. But when insurance providers illegally bill for each individual or fragmented test on the panel, they face higher billing rates. Medical billing analysis depicts that an occasional unbundling error can lead to just denied or delayed reimbursements, but if a series of unbundling errors are reported over time, a fraud investigation can occur, especially when in regards to errors made in billing for Medicare and Medicaid. In 2014, Duke University actually faced a False Claims Act lawsuit for unbundled cardiac and anesthesia services that were performed together. They eventually settled that lawsuit for $1 million. So now I'll be passing it on to Julio, who'll talk about the next type of fraud, medical identity theft.
Thank you, Hannah. Another example of healthcare fraud is medical identity theft. This is a type of fraud you might not think happens often, but when it does, it can have serious financial and even health consequences. So what exactly is medical identity theft? Medical identity theft is a form of identity theft that occurs when someone uses your personal identifiable information to receive medical services or purchase medical products, usually without your knowledge. Some examples of PII that have been stolen are Social Security number, Medicare identifier, insurance account information, payment information, medical images, and many more. Some of you may think medical identity theft may not occur often, but actually over 70% of hospitals, medical record breaches compromise the theft of sensitive information. That's a number that may sound ridiculously high, but you may ask yourself which group is at most risk for this. As we learned from the videos in the class, elderly are the most prone to be caught up in this type of fraud. In one of the videos, it discussed that federal agents audited a lab in Atlanta where Medicare fraud was taking place. This Medicare fraud was part of a nationwide scheme to target the senior population. Doctors, lab owners, and marketing agents were arrested and placed under investigation. Seniors were targeted for false genetic cancer at-risk tests and were billed to their Medicare accounts. Up to $2.1 billion of fraud were accounted for in false claims. They would be targeted by recruiters at art festivals or in local areas and who would then provide a cheek swab test in return for the Medicare information. So then these recruiters were sent them to the doctors who signed them and without ever meeting them or talking to the patients. They were billed to Medicare for $30 each, adding up to $69 million in fraudulent Medicare claims for each doctor's ad times. Here's a following video example.
Nationwide takedown of individuals accused of running a genetic testing scam that targeted seniors. Together, they allegedly billed Medicare for nearly $2.1 billion in false claims.
This is one of the largest fraud schemes, and it's so large because these tests are so expensive. And Medicare reimburses at such a high rate.
A CBS News investigation earlier this month discovered how the scheme worked. Seniors like Ken and Judy Johnson were targeted. They were attending an art festival when recruiters offered a free genetic cancer test if they would submit to a cheek swab and provide their Medicare number.
I have had colon cancer.
So this was like...
Now that we know what it is, here's some examples of it. How does this type of fraud affect the consumers? Medical identity fraud affects the consumers, and here's some examples. Number one, being billed for services that were never rendered. Fraudulent medical claims can cause major headaches for consumers fighting charges for care they did not receive, leaving them with huge debt at times to pay for. Providers that need to divert significant resources to untangling the mess for these claims. Another way is number two, which is misdiagnosis or mistreatment. Unfortunately, this can happen if a thief medical information is inserted into the victim's files after they've been treated under the victim's names. Things like drugs, allergies, or blood types can get switched around, ending with deadly results. In 2012, third annual survey of medical identity theft found that over 20% of medical identity theft victims said the records were accessed or modified, a number that is more likely to dramatically increase in more recent years. Another way is number three, which is delays in receiving care. Digitalization of patient records means that it's easier than ever to focus on the needs of each individual but when bad data gets into the system, it can impact the framework of their care. Victims of medical identity theft report delays in receiving medication or services due to false data in their files. Also, with the advancement of technology, many people become more highly technological intelligent and can hack into the records. In the first half of 2019 alone, over 32 million patient records were breached, with 88% of them being compromised as a result of hacking incidents. And finally, number four, which is criminal charges. A victim identity theft can be arrested for the misdeed, but in fact, it happens nearly every day. An expose from Consumer Reports, a stolen purse led to a woman's false arrest after a thief used her health insurance card to obtain prescription painkillers. Another woman had a run-in with CPS when a pregnant woman used her identity at a hospital and gave birth to an infant with drugs in her system. These are just a few examples of the effect of stealing patient information and medical identity theft. This type of fraud affects everyone from consumers to patients to healthcare, insurance networks, and providers. Now moving on to Maya with another example of healthcare fraud.
Thank you, Julio. As mentioned earlier, the False Claims Act helps impose strict laws and regulations against those who knowingly commit fraudulent acts. These fraudulent acts include submitting claims for services not rendered in order to get payment from government. Many of these fraudulent claims take place within the healthcare industry, Medicare and Medicaid being the most targeted. The False Claims Act is able to give the government the power to investigate these fraudulent charges and claims for services not rendered and fine perpetrators. False medical history includes upcoding, which is a big problem within the healthcare industry. Providers and healthcare workers will add services and also perform unnecessary services on patients. These providers will then bill insurance claims with these services in order to receive a higher reimbursement. Not only do these healthcare professionals go against their oath to serve patients, they knowingly harm patients in many negative ways. When services are claimed, a patient is risking a denial from the health insurance companies to get services. This can lead to health issues worsening and further financial distress. For consumer protection against being billed for services not rendered, there are 5 we will mention. The HFPP is a voluntary public-private partnership among the federal government, state agencies, law enforcement, private health insurance plans, and healthcare anti-fraud associations. The HFPP fosters a proactive approach to detect and prevent healthcare fraud through data and information sharing. The CMS is a federal agency within the HHS that administers the Medicare program, Medicaid program, state children's health insurance program, clinical laboratory improvement amendments, and several other health-related programs. To prevent and detect fraud and abuse, CMS works with individual entities and law enforcement agencies in order to develop and improve intricate predictive analytics that identify fraud and mobilize a rapid response. CMS connects instantly with its field offices to evaluate fraud allegations through real-time investigations. The OIG protect the integrity of HHS programs and the health and welfare of program beneficiaries. The OIG operates through a nationwide network of audits, investigations, inspections, evaluations, and other related functions. The DOJ, OIG, and HHS established to establish and strengthen existing programs combating Medicare fraud while investing new resources and technology to prevent and detect fraud and abuse. The GSA consolidated several federal procurement systems into one new system. The system for award management, which includes information on entities that are debarred or proposed for debarment, disqualified from certain types of federal financial and non-financial assistance and benefits, disqualified from receiving federal contracts or certain subcontracts, excluded or suspended from Medicare program. Next, we have Natalie, who will discuss the next fraudulent act, false diagnosis.
Thank you, Maya. The next type of healthcare fraud that we'll be discussing today is false diagnosis. Now, what are false diagnoses? False diagnosis is when a patient intentionally misdiagnosed, or when a physician intentionally misdiagnosed their patients for personal gain. Doctors can be committing healthcare fraud by providing false diagnoses and using incorrect procedure codes to describe the service. Physicians could claim that they provided a service to a patient that was never provided, and this would mostly be for financial gain, as they claimed they provided a more expensive service than was actually provided. They could use incorrect procedure codes to increase the amount of money they make. So let's talk about some examples of what false diagnosing would be. According to the Southern District of Florida's Attorney Office, Dr. Thompson, a doctor located in the South Florida, pleaded guilty for falsely diagnosing hundreds of patients with ankylosing spondylitis, a rare chronic inflammatory disease of the spine. As a result, Medicare paid about $2.1 million in excess capitalization fee, in which approximately 80% went to the doctor. Another example would be how Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos, a failed blood testing company, was found guilty of diagnosing patients with inaccurate blood results. According to Fortune's article, a Theranos blood test revealed that patient Brittany Gold was having a miscarriage, but her pregnancy was in fact healthy. This false positive caused her to change the medication she was taking, which could have harmed the fetus. Elizabeth Holmes knew her product could not produce the results it promised to, and even created fake demonstrations to fool investors and other people that her product produced accurate results. This advanced technology that was supposed to be revolutionary to blood testing was a lie, as it misdiagnosed patients. Holmes lied to the world and put everyone who used the product at risk for fame and money. Now let's talk about how false diagnosing affects patients, insurance companies, and providers. First, it affects patients the most by adding problems and stress to their lives. This can affect them mentally, as their bills can increase in price, which can cause confusion and distress. It can also affect them physically, as we see patients being exposed to unnecessary or dangerous medical procedures that can harm their bodies. For example, like any x-rays for a condition that you don't have, which exposes your body to radiation. Physicians who falsely diagnose their patients put them at significant risk just because of greed. It can also increase their premiums and the cost of supplies and services. Secondly, according to the NAIC, false diagnosis inflicts extra costs on insurance companies. Insurance fraud is estimated to cost the country more than $40 billion each year and can add up to become more and more serious. The more fraud that happens, the more harm insurance companies will experience. Lastly, providers such as hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and other healthcare facilities can become affected by it. False diagnosis can harm a company's reputation and revenue, and it can negatively affect employees working for the company. Let's say that a physician from a hospital was just discovered to falsely diagnose hundreds of patients over the time. This will put both the physician and the hospital under strict review and could hurt the hospital's reputation and revenue. This can put employees' jobs at stake, as severe fraud can shut the hospital down. False diagnosis negatively affects everyone as it puts patients, insurance companies, and providers at risk. Now I'll pass it on to Alexi, who will be talking about kickbacks and bribes.
Thank you, Natalie. When your doctor is in the process of making a decision about a treatment, whether it be a decision to implant a certain medical device, to prescribe a certain drug, or to refer you for other medical services, you want to be assured that your doctor is doing so for the right reasons. That is, you want to be assured that the doctor's decision is unbiased and based solely on his or her professional opinion as to what is in the patient's best interest. All too often, however, the doctor's decision-making can be tainted with the possibility of monetary gain. According to Merriam-Webster, a kickback is a payment made to someone facilitating the transaction illicitly, and to bribe is to persuade someone to act in someone's favor, typically in an illegal or dishonest way by gifts of money. Medical device companies stand to make millions of dollars based on promises of monetary gain to doctors in exchange for loyalty to their companies. As mentioned before by Julio, an example of kickbacks and bribes in the healthcare industry would be a case of false genetic testing where federal agents in Atlanta audited a lab in which a Medicare fraud scheme was taking place. This Medicare fraud was part of a nationwide scheme to target the senior population. As a result, many doctors, lab owners, and marketing agents were arrested and placed under investigation. These innocent people would be targeted by recruiters who would provide a cheek swab test in return for their Medicare account information. In exchange for monetary gain, fraudulent doctors would sign these orders without ever meeting or interacting with these patients. They were billed to Medicare for $30 each, adding up to a whopping $69 million in fraudulent Medicare claims. Another prime example of kickback and bribes would be the case of a healthcare executive who was convicted to around $1 billion in Medicare fraud. A Florida health executive, Philip S. Forms, was accused of paying kickbacks and bribes to doctors so they would refer their patients to his nursing home and assisted living facilities. He was able to bribe doctors and administrators for referrals in order to bill Medicare for fraudulent services. S. Forms was convicted of 20 counts on a $1 billion Medicare fraud scheme. The result of kickbacks and bribes in the healthcare system is the financial burden patients bear and result of the actions of fraudulent healthcare workers. Patients may go through unnecessary exploitative procedures such as medical tests provoked by an incorrect diagnosis. The compromise of their personal medical records and insurance information is because of falsified claims that were submitted by fraudulent medical billers. Patients in these situations are most likely going to be victims of financial risk to their insurance benefits due to the amount of unnecessary co-payments billed and sent to their third-party payers. An example of the situation could be if a patient who is in need of a power wheelchair is denied because their benefits in Medicare's records is exhausted, which means that they are proven to be ineligible of receiving one due to the record of them already receiving a power wheelchair previously. Patients aren't the only ones who bear the financial burden from these fraudulent actions, as third-party payers such as insurance companies also suffer from the financial loss from the unnecessary billing of certain services and products. Doctors prescribing or using unnecessary expensive products and services cause great waste of resources and materials in the healthcare industry. Both insurance companies and benevolent providers have to deal with a loss of trust and credibility from consumers, which could lead to an even greater financial loss within their businesses. Doctors caught participating in kickbacks or bribes have a strong possibility of losing their medical certification and licensure in enforcement to the anti-kickback statute and the strike statute, which both forbid doctors from referring patients to certain healthcare providers in which doctors may have interest. I will now pass it on to Natalie, who will be finishing us off with the conclusion.
Thank you, Alexi. To conclude, fraud affects everyone. Patients are hurt financially, organizations and providers who commit fraud lose their accreditation, and insurance providers, both public and private, like Medicare or Blue Cross, are forced to increase their premiums. We only covered about 5 common types of healthcare fraud, but there are so many more. On average, healthcare fraud costs the country tens of billions of dollars each year. And here are references. And that concludes our presentation about the types of healthcare fraud. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.